Well, first of all, I think that the process was initiated by affected stakeholders at the university, particularly the students who have raised a range of issues, and those issues have formed part of their protest action, and in an engagement with management, which in turn has been engaged with a wider university community that has been trying to get to the bottom of the issues. It became clear that there is a need to actually have a more detailed conversation about what's going on, what are the underlying issues, what are the what's the background to the crisis, etc., etc. Generally, issues I think are broadly known, but they have not actually been debated and gone into as much detail as is necessary. So this platform will allow an opportunity to deal with that. But there are two parts to the process. The one part deals with this, the other part deals with a whole range of crises which affect the university, and that's what the Rapid Response Task Team will be dealing with. And these are issues which are agreed that in order to create an environment for inclusive participation in these processes, you need to address the fact that some people were angered by what they considered to be an alienating culture, which they referred to as culturally not inclusive, rejective of the phenomenon of the other, and as a result of their protest, then got punished and excluded in various ways. Now you have a situation of a chicken and an egg, so that's how they justify their action. But if you want to start on a clean slate, you need to deal with that. And the clemency conversation forms part of that. We needed to create an environment where there could be a conversation to get to the bottom of the issues to enable that to happen. And then there were a whole range of other related issues about financial exclusion, academic exclusions, etc., which need to be looked into and dealt with. All of those issues are about creating a favorable environment to have a conversation, because fundamentally, we're not going to be able to shift the direction of the institution unless we actually are engaged and we have a discussion and we have an understanding of what we're talking about. Everybody now, almost a cliche, talks about a notion of decolonization of higher learning, decolonization of curriculum, offensive symbols, etc., etc. But you know, a university is a festival of ideas, so you need to have a contestation of those concepts and notions and all of that, so that we get to the bottom of redefining and creating an inclusive environment in the university where everybody feels that they can be part of the institution, and that there is no co-option of others into a dominant culture and a dominant institution. So that's a very important conversation. And arising from that, we think that we'll be able to map out what it is that we need to do. Yes, actually, the way this is constituted, some people may be critical of it because we've gone out of our way to ensure an inclusive process, to ensure that the voices are inside. Remember that this steering committee, which I chair, is not the body that is going to be doing the work, but it plays two very important roles. The first one is that it will define the terms of reference. So we're running a process now of ensuring that the university community gives us an indication of what they want out of this process. And secondly, it will facilitate the appointment of commissioners. And the idea is that we must ensure that we deal with the trust deficit that there is amongst all parties. There is the lack of trust of management, of council, of students and what they're about, of staff, of Senate, etc., etc. So there's a mistrust amongst key and critical stakeholders that for the success of the institution have to work together. And given that situation, you need a facilitated process. But facilitators must come in a defined space if they are going to be able to give you a product that you can work with. Otherwise, they will run a conversation that will be a never-ending conversation, and it will frustrate everybody. We need to be clear that these are your terms of reference, these are your parameters, this is what you should be doing. Leave everything outside of that. We can work on it on our own, but we just need you to take us from A to Z. We may adjust that at a later stage, depending on what the outcome of this process is. But importantly, we need to have that limited so that it's manageable, so that it has deliverables. And it's important that everybody shouldn't see in that a manipulation of the process, if you like. So that's why it's important for us to spend as much time as possible in defining the scope of the work of the commissioners. And identifying commissioners is also critical. So we're running a process of defining who ideally should be a commissioner. So a profile of a commissioner typically should be what kind of person and how would they assist the process. Once we've done that, we'll then start the process of nomination of commissioners, etc., etc. These are the very critical processes, and they are at the heart of the legitimation of that conversation and its outcome. It's hard work because you have a real diversity of views and strength of feelings from across the board. In some cases, people think that there is a culture of impunity that is being cultivated, or that some parties are allowed to make unreasonable demands ad infinitum. And of course, there is an impatience with the idea that there may be a different way to doing things. But you know what? Transformation is a journey that starts with a conversation and a definition of parameters of where each of the parties stand and the definition of how we embark on a journey to find each other. And that's what this journey is about. Well, I think that the work of the commissioners would be looking at UCT, but it will also be looking at what's happening, what the national context is. The national context is, as I said previously, about symbols everywhere in society that represent the past in a domineering and dominating way. So their manifestation in a university context shouldn't surprise anyone. And also the contestation around issues of access to education, the marginalization of the poor. And that inclusion is not just about financial access, it's also about an environment that is not accommodating, but truly reflecting of the diversity of who we are as a country and who we are as a university. Because we're not just a South African university, but we're an international institution with a significant presence of students coming from other parts of the African continent, and also academic staff that come from other parts of the continent and indeed the world. So that's the nature of a university. University is an international center, and UCT is probably among the best positioned to be that. But the diversity of the institution has to be reflected. And that's a very important journey for us to take. It's hard to tell. I mean, the fact of the matter is that crises tend to produce a sense of urgency to find solutions. It is quite possible that there would have been a sense of complacency, because these issues that we're talking about now, we're talking about them over 20 years since a free South Africa. So the crisis has exercised the minds of everybody that you can't have a status quo in an environment that pretends to be new. And there's a lot, not just about UCT, but about South Africa generally, that represents continuity from the past. And yet there is a great pretense about a rupture from that past. And that's the tension that we have to try and deal with. How do we mark that shift? How do we mark that transition from the past? How do we do so in a way that is demonstrably visible and shifting the sense that there is no commitment to that? So my sense is that without the crisis that was sparked in 2015, we probably would not be having this conversation in the way that we're having it, with a sense of urgency that we think we're doing. But there is a danger, though, that we can be lost in detailed analysis and not act because we're locked in protracted, never-ending discussions about what needs to be done and have paralysis by analysis, if you like. And that's why we are concerned that we must be very practical in this. Yes, there is a broad conceptual stuff that needs to be done, but we have to be practical. People acting on things and genders more trust, raises confidence, and then people must feel the environment changing. They must see the environment changing. Well, the key ingredient to success of an IRTC process is inclusiveness, a sense that everybody's views and ideas are equally important. So you need to create opportunities for everybody to be heard. The second thing is that however we think ideas may be offensive, we need to create an opportunity for those to be engaged. And engagement of ideas is not confrontation, is not violence, it is marshalling our intellectual skills and ability to argue, debate. And after all, that's what an academic and intellectual environment is about. So it is important that we recognize that. So we should be open-minded, but we should be clear about where we want to be. This process would lose a lot if we ran a clinical process. It is important that we run a process that would be educational, that would be reorientating, that would be reacculturating, if you like, of the community. So the processes around this, the engagement around this, is probably going to be more important than what is produced in the final reports that are shared by the community, because it's likely to be an educational process, and for me that's very, very important. But part of this is that where we're engaged in identity politics and in a retrospective way, and I say that in referring to the strong assertion around decolonization and all of that, we also have to be sensitive to the fact that in a new world that we're in, there is a redefinition of what the new world looks like. And we must position ourselves as an institution of higher learning such that we're part of that redefinition of the new world. In that, I'm referring to the fourth industrial revolution. We must not be left behind that, because that is the new language of a new world, and we must not follow it. Otherwise, we're going to have same status, Cinderella status, as we had in the past. We must be at the decision-making table that defines what that is. So the conversation about decolonization must also be about enabling of Africans as people from this continent being part of redefining the new knowledge systems, a new world as is driven by the fourth industrial revolution. The first thing is transparency. What are we talking about? What are these demands all about? And transparency is also about not making false promises. It's better that we have a conflict and we fight but we know what's possible and what is not possible. We mustn't be short-termist in our approach and make commitments that we'll never be able to live up to, because all that we'll be doing would be to postpone the day of reckoning. We have to be transparent, and everybody has to see what is possible and what is not possible. So, and transparency means making available the fullness of information available to enable and to equip all of the parties to the process to make the right decisions and to take the right positions. The second aspect is that we need to make sure that we are tolerant of different views. If we're not tolerant of different views, then we're not going to be able to take advantage of great ideas that may come from people that we least expect from. The third thing is that we need to be honest with each other and not pander to populist notions. We need to demonstrate responsible leadership. After all, everybody in the university community is a societal leader and maybe today or tomorrow be expected to direct society in sustainable ways. And that starts with being honest, with being frank and having integrity. So these are difficult times. The quickest thing, the easiest way out would be to make glowing promises on a whole range of things that people may be looking to get, and that will just be postponing the day of reckoning. So those for me are very critical considerations. Fourthly, I think we need to take into account the fact that we shouldn't be parochial. We are not the only ones who are contending with these issues. These are not just national issues that we're contending with. These are issues that are being raised everywhere. If you go to Europe today, students in Europe are fighting over indebtedness when they leave university, because most of the welfare states that prevailed in most European countries have since collapsed, and students pay their way through university. By the time they finish, they have huge amounts of debt to carry. United States of America, similarly, a country like Germany, which largely subsidizes university better than most, and clearly gives free tuition education, but for other things like accommodation, etc., you carry as a learner. We have to get a sense of all of those systems and see what works. We also have to be realistic about the limitations of our fiscus. And in the way we articulate the position of a university must be in the context of other societal needs. And all of that has to be taken into account. Now, that's entering the debate with an open mind and exercising the requisite leadership. There may be issues, there may be unintended consequences with a lot of things that we're trying to deal with. And the issues around politics of identity, we need to ensure that we remove offensive symbols. But at the same time, we must beware of the negative consequences of a cultural revolution, which might introduce elements of thought policing, which might introduce elements of intolerance to free expression, which is a constitutionally guaranteed right, of course, subject to it not being offensive to others. But we have to be careful that as we make a shift from offensive material, we don't become offensive as well and create a reverse of what we are fighting. So it's a very delicate balance, and I think you only have to go back to the Constitution. In the Constitution, there's a very careful architecture of we are committed to a non-racial society. We're going to transition to a non-racial society by introducing redress measures. And those measures are not intended to be a reverse discrimination or are not intended to introduce various forms of chauvinism in community. So we have to guard against all of those. But, you know, this is the value of a process like this. If we can get it right, it would assist us to actually engage with all of those complexities. Well, I'll give you a typical example. I mean, there are many people who support redress measures that are intended, for instance, around in the realm of labor, for labor relations, for instance, around employment equity and around affirmative action. And in the way we've couched it in the South African framework, for instance, we don't talk about quotas, we talk about targets, because there is a recognition that you must place people in leadership roles who are equipped to fulfill their mandate in those roles and do so excellently. When they do so excellently, they become ambassadors of others behind them. The danger with a quota system, for instance, is that you chase numbers. You put people who are not competent for roles, and they may mess things up and create a negative stereotype in society about that particular grouping. The other is that there is in our society a grouping that feels that, you know what, during the era of apartheid, there was Afrikaner, the rise of Afrikaner capital, which was supported on the back of the state. It was a racist project, and can't see the difference between that and what we're trying to do, and yearn for a similar dispensation, and have no sense that in the context in our context, it would be a manifestation of racial chauvinism, if you like. I'm entitled to this because I am black. Don't worry about whether I'm deserving of it or I'm in need of it. I am black and therefore I am entitled to it. I'm a woman and therefore I'm entitled to it. That for me is chauvinistic. It isn't redress. It isn't. So this process should help us make a clear distinction in defining our journey to ensure that we affirm the efficacy of creating a non-racial society and not entrench the racialist divisions that characterize the past. The jury is still out. I think that the IRTC's outcome would largely depend on the commitment of the key and critical constituencies in the university. But there is a great potential here to produce something that could be a benchmark for others to follow. We just need to make sure that we show commitment and tolerance. My sense is that the wider university community is hungry for this conversation, is hungry for this process, are keen to see it go on. So we have to do everything possible to make sure that it happens. I've just been at a council meeting today. Council affirms our commitment to ensuring that we have a successful process here, and we ensure that conversation is allowed. And indeed, it's a conversation that is internal, but it's a conversation that is external. We have participation, by the way, by members of convocation, and we transmit our conversation live to the university community because we want everybody to participate and get a sense of where all of these processes are coming from. We hope that the work of the commissioners will likewise follow the same pattern. Well, Council, by the way, felt strongly that this process of IRTC is critical enough that as Chair of Council, I should lead it. Under normal circumstances, I would have preferred that somebody else leads it to allow me to have a role of benefit of receiving a report from IRTC with the rest of colleagues on council, which would allow a little bit of distance. But as a facilitative process, I thought it's important to play that role. Remember that, as I indicated previously, the commissioners are going to do the real work, and the commissioners would then submit their report to the IRTC steering committee, and in turn the steering committee would put such recommendations as are possible to council and therefore report to council. So council places a great deal of importance to this. But of course there's an interface also, because council, where it would benefit from this review and reflection of where the university is and how the university is looking to get out of this. Council is driven also by a consideration of how to position the university going forward, defining the strategic direction of the university. You must remember that one of the primary responsibilities of council is to provide strategic direction to the university. We are not management, we are a governing body of the university, and one of our primary tasks is to do exactly that, to help the university community to set its direction. And that has to be informed by how we want to shift from the past and all of that. So as I interact with where we're going with all of those things, I'll benefit from my exposure to IRTC steering committee work. We've just agreed at the end of the year last year a strategic planning framework as a council, which we released and announced. And a lot of that you will see in many ways has benefited from what we understand of the conversation that's taking place, what we understand of matters that have caused so much conflict and rancor, and we want to move with those issues at the earliest opportunity, even before the outcome of the IRTC process. So it's a very important interface. It makes for a seamless interface between a reflective conversation and a forward setting a framework that the council is preoccupied with. And it also ensures that a council, which is in terms of the law, the governing body of the institution, and therefore the ultimate authority at the university, is able to act quickly and has a sense of what is urgent and what can be deferred, and how we can apply resources to effect the kinds of things that we need to do. So I do hope that it does convey that sense of importance that we attach to these processes. Well, I'm just very pleased, very pleased with the way the management of the university, the executive leadership under the Vice Chancellor has shown tremendous amount of patience and tolerance and demonstrated preference for dialogue and engagement to other forms of dealing with this. I know that there are people at the university who feel that matters could have been dealt with differently. No doubt management may have had their own shortcomings in dealing with the matter, but largely I think that on balance they've done very well, and I'm very pleased that the student community came together with the executive leadership and crafted an agreement that made it possible for us to do this. It's a very firm and strong statement of demonstration of leadership on the part of the student body. And that's something that we must celebrate and we must be prepared to work with. We have a basis to do that. And indeed, the rest of the university community in joining this process and coming in have not sought to reinvent the wheel, and they've demonstrated an appreciation for what is there, and we're building on that. So you have the makings of something that is very, very groundbreaking here, and we need to find each other. What I'm hoping for is a preference on the part of all stakeholders for a dialogue. See, a university community doesn't lend itself to confrontational skirmishes. You can't have security on campus and still have a free academic environment. At the same time, you can't have violence on the part of other stakeholders and still have a free academic environment. It's not that kind of space. So once you introduce those elements in this environment, you lose its greatest strength, and that's dialogue, intellectual engagement, mastering of ideas, helping society navigate its way through difficult challenges. And that's what we must demonstrate to be capable of doing. And I have a sense that the student leadership, the various stakeholders that are there, the staff, etc., we have around the table an incredible team of people that have that kind of leadership quality.